If you're wondering what the hell I'm wearing right now, you're not the only one. We are so far past laundry day right now that I'm not convinced that it's coming back as a concept. That's a big oh well from me. So today what I wanted to do was review an album that I discovered last night. This album is called Plinkity Plunkity Snappity Toot, and it is by The Poops. I have found myself in kind of a musical rut lately. I've been kind of cycling between early 2000s pop punk music and just the same Charlie Bliss record over and over again. But yesterday I found this band by accident. So last night I was going to ask someone to be in a band called Poop with me, but I wanted to make sure that the band name wasn't taken for like copyright reasons. So what I went ahead and did was look up Poop on Spotify to see if there were any bands named Poop already. And I was actually kind of surprised at how few bands are named Poop, but for whatever reason I kept scrolling and I found this band with an album cover that really grabbed my interest. The band is called The Poops, and the album cover is this really nice, like, orangey, yellowy, golden toned album with lots of flowers and like a can on it. You can think of it as kind of like an Andy Warhol-esque pop art type piece. Upon further inspection of the album art, I noticed actually that the album art is of a can of beans, pork and beans, which is conceptually very relevant for this album by The Poops. I don't think I need to explain that. So I went ahead and clicked on it, and I clicked on their most popular song, which is called Do You Want a Hamburger? I was kind of surprised by what was there. None of the instruments are quite in time with each other, and there's this man singing in a falsetto. Do you want a hamburger? Do you want a chocolate steak? It seemed like the type of song that I would have written and recorded if I were a better singer. And so I just had to continue. I had to see what this artist had to say. And I was not disappointed. In my first listen of this album, my impressions were that the album is kind of divided up into two sections. There's the first section, which reminds me very strongly of like a Diet Sig album, but if Diet Sig were a listenable band. And then the second half reminds me very strongly of like kind of a darker rock sound, like the Ty Segall band. There are 26 tracks in total, but the ones that really stood out to me were Glubberty Booger. Glubberty Booger really reminds me of being back in college at those rock shows where no one really knows how to sing. I felt young again for once. I would say my other favorite tracks were more in the like serious, darker side of things. So Clown Appears was an incredibly poignant track for me. Clown Appears was followed by Twinkle, which is this artist's rendition of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and it just really juxtaposes this familiar song with very absurd and terrifying lyrics. So what does this album mean? In my view, this album is all about a journey. It's kind of the phoenix's journey from death and dying and decay to going up in flames and being reborn as something much stronger. So this album has 3 instrumental tracks, the first one being Gobbledy Plop. Gobbledy Plop sets the tone for this section of the music. For the most part, I would say that the tone of Gobbledy Plop is upbeat and fairly cheerful, but there is an unsettled feeling underneath it all. And I think that this unsettled feeling is underscored by the disjointedness of the music. The instrumentals never quite fit together, and it's very unsettling for the listener. And then the second instrumental track is called Superty Snack. Superty Snack is just as disjointed, but the music is in more of a minor key. The tone of the music is much darker. It's much more bassy and low sounding, and it kind of drags you into hell. It drags you into the underworld. And then the last instrumental track, called Plinkity Plunkity Snappity Toot, which is the title of the album as a whole. What's notable about Plinkity Plunkity Snappity Toot is that it's much more together. It's less disjointed than the other two. It almost reads like a real song. So you go from this point of in Gobbledy Plop being alive but not quite right, to your point of crisis in Superty Snack, to your point of rebirth in, what's it called, Plinkity Plunkity Snappity Toot. Keep wanting to say plop, I don't know why. Where you're emerging from the ashes stronger than you ever were before. And I think this whole journey, this like point of crisis, in my opinion, is speaking to the experience of growing up. What's striking about the music is that it's sung in this childlike falsetto. The way that a lot of the lyrics are posed is in this childlike couplet poem form. A lot of the imagery used is quite childlike, referenced farts and poops and burps and like children's songs, stuff like that. In the first song with lyrics called Fishity Bird, I feel like the artist sets this up very well. We all know children, I'm sure. Children ask a lot of questions when they're young, and in Fishity Bird, the artist is doing just that. The artist says, why are all the fish in the sea? Do they have icicles? Do they watch TV? Do they get their trombone lessons for free? Why do birds live on the moon? Do you think they'll come and visit soon? We're having a party at noon. Tell them all to bring a spoon. If that's not the rhetoric of a 2-year-old, I don't know what is. As we continue through this first section of the album, the tracks are predominantly very upbeat sounding, and they have this sense of childlike absurdity, but as we go through, there's a sense lyrically of something not quite being right, which is, I think, underscored by the really poorly executed instrumentals. For example, chewing gum and candy costs 20 cents. We act like it's because we all sleep in tents. Alligator ate my toys. Moon is upside down today. We made a nose out of clay. I'm not old, I'm only big. Now this all kind of builds and it gets a little bit more dissonant and more creepy as we go along until we reach Superty Snack, where there is an abrupt change in tone, as I mentioned before, and in Clown Appears, the imagery is much, much darker, much more confusing. Maybe there were absurdisms throughout the other songs, but tell me a line that's more sinister than horses oink and piggies neigh. Very spooky. And just the title of Clown Appears really suggests something sinister, all underscored by the change in tone of the music. It's very, very scary. At this point in the listening of the album, it's very difficult for me to go on because it calls to mind my own crises of faith in childhood. Directly after Clown Appears, there is a song called Twinkle. Twinkle is played to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but it's Twinkle Twinkle Little Star just slightly off. As with all of the rest of the tracks, there's that jauntiness that's brought about by the non-tight instrumentals, but additionally, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is what you expect, but it's not what you get. Twinkle twinkle little ice cream soup, how I wonder where is poop? Back behind the refrigerator, saving it for a little later. Twinkle twinkle mashed potatoes, how I wonder about 50 tomatoes. Standing in a long, long line, freshly picked off of a vine. The artist juxtaposes a very familiar childhood tune with horrifying imagery of old rotting food. Could it be the rotting of this poor child's childhood? For the second half of this album, we continue in this very scary, destructive sounding tone until we reach Zoop Zoop Kazoo, in which the music begins to feel a little bit lighter. Maybe there's a tint of sadness in the songs, but it does tend towards the brighter end of things. And then finally, in the end, Our House, that's the second to last track on the album, and the last track with lyrics, it almost does sound like a real song. It's all together. Well, for the most part, it's together. And it seems like, despite having gone through this crisis of faith, the music has come out stronger. It's risen from the ashes, a band that's slightly more together. If this is about childhood and growing up, I feel like maybe Our House symbolizes not being a fully grown adult. A fully grown adult song would sound like very tight and well put together, but Our House is maybe the preteen version. It's signifying a shift in a new direction, or a shift towards being a more fully formed version of its past self, and I think that's beautiful. I think this album is beautiful for its narrative strength, and personally, the lyrics do speak to me. I feel like I could have written it myself. However, I do want to talk a little bit about the critical reception. So on rateyourmusic.com, Plinkity Plunkity Snappity Toot by the Poops has an aggregate rating of 1.99 out of 5 from 17 reviewers. One person says, "This album sucks. It's not funny, and it's way too long. Do not listen. It's legitimately an awful attempt at being funny. It doesn't work at all. Do not listen. It's trying way too hard to be funny, with not enough good sounds for it to work at all." Personally, I totally disagree, and Dorian Ye says, "This album rocks. It's funny and not too long. Do listen. It's legitimately an awesome attempt at being funny. It works at all. Do listen. It's trying just hard enough to be funny, with enough good sounds for it to work at all." And I think that Dorian Ye has quite a way with words, and they stole them right out of my mouth, kind of like how the Poops stole their lyrics right out of my mouth. Now, I have to say this album probably isn't for everyone based on this 1.99 aggregate rating, but I think it is for a very specific subset of people. If you think that you are exactly like me, or if you think that you might be me, I would recommend listening to this album, because personally I've listened to it 3 times today, and I have to admit, full disclosure, the second time that I listened to this album, I actually had to stop midway through because it was making me feel physically ill. But that didn't stop me from picking it back up where I left off and listening to it a 3rd time. Will I be listening to it again soon? Well, I plan to have a theme party where I play Clown Appears on repeat after the COVID vaccine comes out, of course. I'm very proud that for the past 10 hours, all of my Spotify followers see that I've been listening to the Poops. I give this album 5 poops out of 5, despite the physical illness it inflicted upon me. Give it a listen, give me a like, and a subscribe. And also, if possible, please send me like $2 million in the mail. That is it for Vlogmas Day 2. I'm sorry if I was low energy. It's very late at night. It's like 6 p.m. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.